Welcome to BizTech's Startup Show. Today's show is part of our partnership with the Malaysian Business Angels Network 2022 Summit, which is taking place on the 23rd and 24th of June. Our guest today is Naysan Munusamy, the co-founder of MoneyMatch. MoneyMatch is an award-winning digital remittance platform that has successfully executed over 3 billion Malaysian ringgit in transactions, which include cross-border trade payments and individual transfers. Now, Naysan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for the invite, Brian.
Now, Naysan, for a start, give us an overview of MoneyMatch and your journey so far.
Sure. Firstly, thanks so much for inviting us on this show. Thank you very much to the Malaysian Business Agent Network as well for highlighting our startup. We've been around for quite a few years right now in the startup ecosystem. Thanks very much to the support from Cradle, from MBAN, as we look to scale up our own startup here in Malaysia. So what we do is that we are a fintech startup, and we've particularly focused in cross-border settlements. We do it with both individuals who want to send out remittances. We also primarily focus on SMEs and the B2B market who uses for cross-border payments for their trade invoices or for payments of services overseas. And we also serve enterprise customers. We serve other licensees, other fintechs, and even banks as well. Here in Malaysia, as well as we help to move funds overseas using blockchain network, for example, using a lot more integrated new age technologies to move funds around the world.
So what is interesting, of course, is even banks use you. What is your value proposition and how are you different?
Sure. So I guess that our main disruption is not so much against the banks, but more against the traditional network operators. When I say this, I mean more like SWIFT and Western Union. So what we do, we're able to move money around the world a lot more cheaper through our own proprietary networks, our own corridors, our own rails, than what even the traditional network and the SWIFT network can do. So the banks, they move money by partnering with the SWIFT network, but now they're finding out that by partnering with a fintech like us, like MoneyMatch, you can actually move funds for a lot more cheaper, a lot more efficient than traditional legacy networks.
Okay, so that's the gap that you found in the market. How did you build that out? Because you originally started out way back in 2015.
Yeah. It took us quite a while. I would say that we had quite an atypical startup journey. In the year of 2015, we actually joined an accelerator firm. Literally, the start of MoneyMatch was 10 PowerPoint slides by two co-founders. And we are quite proud today. We have over 100 full-time staff. We're almost hitting about 4 billion ringgit worth of transactions. But we really were just 10 PowerPoint slides. In the year 2015, I got into a government accelerator, watched government friends. After that, thanks to the Cradle grants, we raised up more funds. And here we are today, we've also like 5 million US, now raising even further funds. So yeah, it's taken quite a long while. There's never been a major period. We've always been focused on cross-border, but the major focus has changed from individual remittances to very much the cross-border trade. So about 80-85% of all our business flows are actually driven by the SME sector. We found a great niche in serving these underserved SME sectors, and they really, really love our efficiency, our speed, and the cost savings that we bring to them for their trade payments.
Now, that's really interesting. And obviously, I think I'm starting to see where your value proposition is, because within the consortium led by KAF Investment Bank, which just received an Islamic banking license in Malaysia for a digital bank. Tell us about your role in this consortium and how you got involved in it.
Sure. So it is supremely exciting for us. Basically, it started a while ago. These kind of things don't really happen overnight. I must give full kudos to KAF Investment Bank per se. They're the ones who initially embarked on the journey to widen and diversify their own financial group. So they started off making a few financial investments into startups. MoneyMatch is one of them. So they actually rounded off our Series A actually back a couple of years ago. They also invested into Ringgit Plus and a couple other names as well. And this is all in terms of the longer term plans to come into a consortium to exclusively build for them their digital bank. And thankfully, it all went out well. We won our license. But we're superly excited about it because we really feel we are the true startup bank consortium, you could say. All the other four guys are all public listed companies, super big, Grab, telcos, Shopee kind of names we'll say, but we really are a consortium of an investment bank plus, 3 and 4 startups, and we all have our own different parts to build into it. Ringgit Plus is one of the biggest players in the fintech space for personal loans, credit cards, and personal financing. So obviously they'll be taking a big chunk in the personal part. We will of course be champions in payments, And generally speaking, SME solutions is our main focus. While obviously when CARSM comes in, CARSM adds on the massive auto financing and the massive scale of all the car financing and auto financing and the huge touch points that they have across Malaysia.
Now, that's really exciting, I think, overall for the startup ecosystem. As you pointed out, this is the one that basically is all homegrown companies that have come together. You've stitched together a plethora of solutions, and then your offering is very, very comprehensive. Now, obviously, that's helped you tremendously overall in terms of your fundraising. You've raised 5.1 million to date. You're now starting your Series B funding round where you're looking for about 10 million, I believe.
Yes.
Where are you at in terms of your Series B's funding, and how will you deploy that capital?
Sure. So we're about, I would say, halfway, three quarters way through the process. A couple of primary lead venture capital firms are deep in the due diligence stage first right now. We have quite a few other investors looking on for lead. Nonetheless, we are still very much open up to a few other strategic investors. I think for us right now, we really see a really good chance for us to get a few more strategic investors, a few more local names as well, potentially, as well as we look to really ramp things up. And a lot of the fund utilization is really about bringing ourselves out above and beyond just Malaysia, and also widening ourselves in Malaysia. So going out there, we see ourselves as an ASEAN-focused business. We have a few more licenses up our tricks as well. We already got a Brunei license. We're getting a Singapore license pretty soon as well. We got a Hong Kong license, and we're going to get 2 or 3 more other licenses where the majority of our funds will be deployed to bring our solutions out to new markets. On top of that, and beyond that as well, the digital bank part plays quite a big role here in Malaysia. We will be spending quite a bit on infrastructure building. There's quite a fair bit of the bank parts that we're building over the next 12 to 24 months. And that's super exciting because it will be when it's launched eventually within the next 12 to 24 months. There's going to be a total addressable market, new revenue streams for MoneyMatch. That's something that's really, really exciting for us.
Now, as you say, you're an ASEAN play, but the outlier there is you're already in Australia. What was the thinking behind being in Australia, and how has that worked out for you?
Sure. So our main focus is still ASEAN and Asia per se. Australia and in the future Europe and all that, we go out there, we get licenses over there, we get banking operating accounts that enables us to move funds over there seamlessly for at a bare minimal cost, right? So Malaysian customers can move funds out to Australia via MoneyMatch almost same day, instantly per se at the best rates, purely because we have our own network connections over there. So the MoneyMatch network and rails keeps on growing and expanding to as many countries, but we focus on our customers here in the Asian markets.
Okay, I want to zoom in on the Malaysian startup ecosystem, and what is exciting, obviously, is the fact that a couple of companies that have been seeded a couple of years ago, and you've got government funding as well. That's actually all come and worked out very, very well. What's your opinion on the startup ecosystem right now in terms of support in 2022?
Sure. So I would say the support is decent, but there's still quite a fair bit of work to be done. I would say that Malaysian startup ecosystem is still pretty much in the nascent states. I think that Grab is one easy example everybody likes to talk to about as well. But I think that the more successful Malaysian startups you'll be seeing will probably be heading down that direction as well. It is a little bit difficult from a later stage perspective, Series B, Series C, to see serious money coming from the Malaysian institutions as well. Malaysian public markets have certain limitations in terms of the kind of exposure retail is willing to have in more higher risk investments and whatnot. So I guess that still needs a lot of things to be developed on. The early stage ecosystem in terms of accelerators, incubators, Cradle, that's a fantastic. We love Cradle to bits. We wouldn't be here without Cradle, for example. But then, obviously, if we want to avoid the Grab situation or people moving up with the Series B up to Singapore and all that, I don't think that's really solved right now at the moment. I think later stage startups, like CARSM, all that doing a NASDAQ listing and whatnot per se. Generally speaking per se, you kind of have to move out. So I think there's still a lot more additional work that can be done to improve the funding and financing stages in Series B, Series C, and even the later stages as well. If you want to have unicorns really based out of Malaysia, hiring thousands of people out of Malaysia, that's really the way forward.
How about Punjab Capital? That was basically set up last year and seeded by, in various venture capital firms and so forth to exactly address this issue of A's and B's in particular, Series A and Series B. Are you seeing that among your colleagues, your friends and staff who are receiving funding or perhaps engaging these Punjab Capital seeded venture capital firms?
So I think in the earlier stages of the Punjab guys, they're definitely very active. The early stage, the seed up to the Series A level, we see that quite a fair bit. Haven't seen much of a Series B, Series C play thus far yet. I guess we hope to see that in the coming future, but they have not been active in that scene. I think there's a level of maturity required to understand more complex regional businesses per se that I think that Malaysia still needs to grow up, I guess, in the coming years per se, as compared to the VC sitting in Singapore who see regional players, understand numbers, understand the risk to be taken per se. We don't quite see that from the Punjab side just yet at the moment.
And what sort of ticket sizes are they deploying right now?
Well, what we've seen is still in the earlier stages, so still a few million US, I guess, and lower amounts thus far as well. I think there's been one or two bigger tickets where they've done overseas startups. I don't quite understand how or why that's worked out per se. They want to bring that over to Malaysia to fight competition. How is that logical? I'm not sure, but yeah. So in that sense, per se, we haven't really seen the Punjab guys supporting the larger, I guess, Malaysian startups thus far yet.
Okay, and what about the regulations around fintechs in Malaysia? In fact, if you look at your history and when I did the research, you really rode that fintech wave that Bank Negara and Securities Commission opened up the regulatory sandbox, and at each juncture, you were able to then ride that wave. What does that look like now in 2022?
Oh, well, I don't think there's anything that ever changed, right? I would say that it all comes down to your own startup co-founders hustle per se, right? I think that the reason why at MoneyMatch per se, we're particularly riding the wave is because we really want to grow our business over here in Malaysia. We're obviously talking to the regulators, trying to understand what's the timelines like, what's the talks perspective about future licensing, future allowances and whatnot as well, and making sure we're always out there, talking to them, engaging them politely to make sure when they do open things up, we're the first in line. So we've continuously been the first ever to graduate successfully from the Malaysian fintech sandbox, first ever to get a digital banking license group as well, and all that is really about engagement. But I do understand, because generally speaking, very large regional startups per se, they want to base themselves in Singapore, right? So they want to deal with the monetary authorities in Singapore per se. There are lesser restrictions and so on and so forth per se. So I think it's a bit more about that. But I think that if you're a fintech really focused in Malaysia and you engage politely with the regulators, understand the timelines and when can things be done up, you can actually go quite far per se. Malaysia, through the Securities Commission, was one of the first few to open up licensed fintechs through ECF, peer-to-peer financing, and now IEOs and cryptos, right? So I think that from a regulatory perspective, it has been open, but I think that maybe certain players prefer the best place out of Singapore per se, rather than being focused on Malaysia, where there are more restrictions and capital controls, generally speaking.
But one of the things, Naysan, we have to give Securities Commission and Bank Negara credit for is the fact that if you actually drill down and you're in this space and you've rode the wave, as I said, actually from a regulatory standpoint, with the exception of capital controls of money flows in and out, basically they've been very much in the forefront of the game. They've been pushing the envelope.
People might say Singapore might be, but I would argue Bank Negara is the same, if not even more.
No, that's what I'm saying, because
Singapore.
They're really at the forefront. It's not that Singapore is a way ahead. Bank Negara and Securities Commission have been in the forefront. They've been taking the lead. The envelope.
You will find us much more well developed, in my personal opinion, than the majority of ASEAN nations, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, aside from Singapore, has far more mature fintech regulations. They actually have general allowances. Foreigners can come in here, own 100% fintechs, and run a licensed business over here as well. What more could you ask for, right? So from that perspective as well, aside from Singapore, Malaysia is definitely top two in ASEAN in terms of maturity of financial regulations.
Okay, Naysan, I want to zoom in on you now and really around your entrepreneurship journey. As you said, you're really epitome of the startup journey. You've hustled, you've built your business, it was not an overnight success, but you're really getting there. Tell us about some valuable lessons that you've learned along the way.
Oh, well, a great many lessons, I would say, but one very surprising lesson, I guess, that I would like to mention is like really surprising, I guess, advice that I'll give to startup founders is like, don't rush things. You normally hear everybody always telling you, oh, be aggressive, move fast, move really fast. But I would actually counter argue that, because if you are the kind of person who's already taken the leap to be a startup co-founder, I want to start up my own business and all that kind of stuff, you probably are already a go-getter. You're probably already aggressive. So my advice to you is actually to hold back quite a fair bit. I think that there's quite a few aspects to it, but it's actually really, really important. Even the bare basics, right? Don't rush into starting a business with people or group of people we don't really know and respect and love really well.
I think that's a good piece of advice.
A lot of co-founding teams, right, start up to rush. Oh, I know how to do tech. Oh, I know how to do business. Let's be friends. Yeah. 6 months later, when it comes to equity and all the kind of things, they collapse. So it's always the case, right? So, I think a lot of people rush into the kind of things. Another example of us rushing into things is like, oh, I see a market opportunity and develop a product really, really fast. I'm first to market, fantastic, right? There are a lot of other multinational corporates, large local corporates who aren't that silly. They've probably already seen that market opportunity per se, but then you should ask yourself, why haven't they went on and get it done themselves, right? Probably because the market scale is not even that big. So that's an example per se of startups overly rushing into things. They think it's really, really sexy, but actually that business, let's just say, for example, a unique type of insurance, insurance that only fits one particular type of thing, right? Insurtech, right? But then actually the market here in Malaysia is totally not ready for it. It sounds sexy to you. Nobody actually is buying it per se. And it totally fails. So I see, don't rush into things. It goes all the way from your co-founding team all the way into product development and understanding market scale per se, because most startup co-founders are very go-getters. So it's actually taking a deep breath back per se and trying to look at the overview and understand things a little bit better before you rush into it.
Now, from what you said, one of the key things was that you said it over again, don't rush. Has that worked for MoneyMatch? I see that obviously working for MoneyMatch.
Yeah, it has. But I think that it will work well for any heavily regulated industry. So being a fintech, being a financial service regulator, we are very heavily regulated. Malaysia, overseas, Big Four is our auditor and whatnot per se. So with that being in mind, we have actually learned very much, when engaging with regulators, engaging with major stakeholders. It's really about playing the longer game. It's really about the long game. It's really about not rushing into things, understanding your stakeholders a lot more better per se before coming out with a proposal. So that's, I think, generally speaking, one of the major lessons you learn, and it's worked out fairly well for us. But I guess if you're like a completely cowboy industry, you're doing crypto, some random IEO, or you're doing something that's totally like e-commerce, which is very common and you don't need much regulation, then yeah, you should be as cowboy, you should move things extremely fast if you're doing e-commerce or you're doing crypto. But let's just say we're doing financial services or logistics, which is also very regulated, for example. No, you got to be a bit wise about how you want to run your business from a sustainable standpoint.
And also then, Naysan, the other thing that we didn't talk about in terms of the startup ecosystem and how it's going to evolve moving forward is the funding winter that's happening now.
Yeah.
Are you and your friends starting to see that it's harder to get things across the line in terms of funding?
Definitely. I think from the further the investor is away geographically, the harder it is right now to close the deal. Nothing got to do with physical meetings or video calls, but everybody's being a little bit more extra cautious. So normally one of the first things you do when you're a little bit more cautious is normally invest within your own region or your own country per se, right? So I think right now per se, we find a lot more better feedback from Southeast Asian investors or even North Asian investors per se as compared to even further away investors. So that's one of the first impacts we're seeing per se. I guess from a business standpoint, every startup is built a little bit differently. The pandemic was a big eye-opener and a teacher to us per se. The first part of the pandemic, we suffered really, really badly. But during the second lockdown, when the economy was still doing very badly, we actually started growing massively. We started really supporting the essential businesses per se. We started riding the trend for essential businesses, F&B, e-commerce was our major supporters. And the e-commerce sector grew and thrived during the pandemic when many other sectors died, right? So during the winter as well, tech does solve some problems. So there will be some sectors that will die because people will be spending less. But tech also solves a lot of problems. It also reduces the cost. So there will be a fair bit of tech startups that will also thrive very much so. So if you're not the kind of startup who's going to thrive at the very start, you have to be the kind of startup who has to figure things out and to pivot basically, soon enough per se to do it well. Or you get bought out or die off during the winter per se. But the pandemic has already really toughened up a lot of startups who survived throughout, throughout the last 2.5 years.
But okay, so I agree with that. But I think one of the key things is also the fact that people who have raised money already, they were able to ride out the pandemic. I think the challenge for a lot of companies, and not just in Malaysia, not just in Southeast Asia, but around the world, is do you have the runway to survive to profitability?
Correct. Yeah, that's a very, very big issue. So I think that, but that's actually really what happens when it comes down from a perspective of like the pandemic wiping out a lot of the startups that really couldn't stand on their own 2 feet, right? From a perspective of like, however tough the markets are, right? If you got a business that really is thriving, is growing, maybe not revenue, maybe at least numbers or volume, you will find the investors, you will find people who believe in that story and going to grow it, right? So it still comes down to that startup hustle, right? When times are tough, all right, when everybody is dying down, are you gonna take it laying down? Are you gonna stand up, figure shit out, pardon my language, pivot out the business, add on a new line as well. One of my very good friends, I don't want to mention the name, they are a traditional F&B business, but tech startup for their business, doing really well, regional, fantastic. Obviously the pandemic wiped them out, right? But do you know that during the pandemic, food delivery went like tenfold? So these guys basically using the entire network of F&B, flipped up, created a new mobile app within 2 or 3 months, and now they're one of the top 3 largest players in F&B delivery here in Malaysia. That's an example. And these kind of guys, however bad the pandemic is, will eventually find funding because they managed to pivot out the products and address the situation, evolve the dynamics, and are still growing with the times. And that's really what a modern tech startup should be able to do, even regardless how much of a winter it is.
Now, Naysan, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, but do you have any final thoughts to leave us with before we end this interview?
Well, give us a try here at MoneyMatch. I think, or generally speaking, it's not MoneyMatch per se. I think that do give a try to the fintech sector per se. I think you'll find a lot of our services fully regulated, offering a lot more cheaper, a lot more faster than traditional banks. If you're an investor, please do consider helping out the Malaysian fintech ecosystem as well. We're over here raising our Series B, and please do reach out to me directly if you're interested.
Now, I wish you the best of luck in your fundraise, Naysan.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Cheers.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Naysan Munusamy, the co-founder of MoneyMatch, on BizTech Startup Show. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks for tuning in.